Eduardo.
Dr. Warren and the Committee of Correspondence has sent us the warning. The British will be here soon.
Today, we're taking a trip back in time through beautiful eastern Virginia, starting in Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in North America, where over 400 years ago, 3 ships full of intrepid souls arrived to build a colony in the New World. Then it's off to Woodstock, man. No, we won't be rocking out to some purple hazy memories of the 1960s in Woodstock, New York. We're going to Woodstock, Virginia, to learn about the Revolutionary War hero Peter Muhlenberg. Then we'll take the Colonial Parkway to Yorktown, Virginia, where the very last major battle of the Revolutionary War brought the decisive American victory to George Washington. Buckle up and let's ride. I'm here at historic Jamestown, site of the original Jamestown settlement, where recent discoveries have shown the exact location of the settlement and its fort. In fact, these ongoing discoveries are happening even today. Now, these discoveries also show that the settlement was in a far more secure location than was originally thought, which was important because it protected the fort from cannon fire from Spanish vessels. The James River has changed course since then, and they've also constructed a seawall to protect the ruins of Jamestown. Back in 1606, King James I granted a charter to a group of London entrepreneurs in order to establish an English settlement in the Chesapeake region of North America. These settlers sailed from London with the express purpose to settle Virginia, find gold, and search for a water route to the Orient. However, only 104 survived the treacherous journey. On May 14, 1607, 104 men and boys, along with 39 sailors, selected Jamestown Island to be their starting point for settling in the New World. They departed their 3 ships, the Godspeed, the Susan Constant, and the Discovery, and named their new English colony Jamestown. You got it, after their king, King James I. It is regarded as the first permanent English settlement in the New World. Now, the location they chose here on the James River provided a port, which was essential and valuable to the settlement's success. Because this was the first permanent English settlement in America, these newcomers would soon find out that surviving in the New World would prove surprisingly difficult. Almost immediately upon landing, the colonists were under attack by the Algonquin natives, which caused great hardship. So, one of the first priorities was to build a fort. Archaeologists have recently discovered evidence of the location of the walls of the fort, as you can see. Now, it is recorded that over a month's time or so, the newcomers were able to, quote, bear and plant palisades. These wooden palisaded walls formed a triangle around a storehouse, some homes, and a church. The Jamestown settlers chose this site for a few reasons. One major reason was the location. It was on the end of a peninsula surrounding the colonists with water on 3 sides, making it easy to defend. Sometimes the peninsula would even flood, making it an actual island. Another reason? The location provided a port, which would be valuable and essential to the settlement's success. Though these were all important factors and helpful in deciding the location of the settlement, the real reason they chose Jamestown was the fact that, well, there were no Indians living there. In fact, they were so relieved that there were no Indians living there that they overlooked the $64,000 question, why weren't there any Indians living there? Well, for starters, it was basically a swamp with brackish water. Typhoid fever and dysentery were rampant among the settlers. and not to mention the fact that it was Indian hunting ground. Disease, famine, and continuing attacks from neighboring Algonquins took a tremendous toll on the population. But there were times when the Powhatan Indians revived the colony with food in exchange for copper and iron implements. It appears that the leadership of Captain John Smith kept the colony from dissolving. Their water source, from a well just like this one, consisted mainly of brackish water. Brackish water is where fresh water and salt water mix, making it disgusting and unsafe to drink. In fact, many who drank the water suffered saltwater poisoning. But the Indians, in contrast, thrived off the land. This humiliated the settlers, who thought themselves superior to the Indians, who were obviously far more experienced and flourishing in the New World. In choosing this location for its strong defensive position, the settlers didn't notice the lack of farmland needed to sustain themselves. The winter of 1609 was a starving time, and only 60 of the original 214 Jamestown settlers survived. That June, they decided to bury cannon and armor and abandon the town. But the arrival of the new governor, Lord Delaware, and his supply ships changed all that. The colony was reborn, although the suffering here at Jamestown didn't totally end for decades. The settlers in Jamestown had little food in reserve for the winter, and they struggled to stay fed and warm. It was during this winter that the colony lost 80% of its population. Many of the settlers went insane with hunger, roaming through the forest in search of nuts and berries, sometimes digging up strange roots to take the edge off their starvation. Leaving the fort for food was in itself a gamble because many who left were often killed by Native Americans. Some of the settlers even resorted to cannibalism. There are written accounts of corpses being dug up and eaten. In fact, there's one account of a man who killed his wife in her sleep and ate her. Desperate for food, a few of the colonists ran away and joined the Indians, hoping they would at least be fed. Pocahontas, who was born about 1595, was the favorite daughter of Powhatan, who ruled the Powhatan Confederacy. Now, Captain John Smith believed that she saved his life twice during the colony's first years. In 1608 and 1609, she was a frequent and welcome visitor to Jamestown. The story of Pocahontas is a fascinating chapter in early American history, filled with stories of war, exotic travels, faith, and heroism, much more interesting than the recent cartoons portraying her life. At the age of 10 or 12, Pocahontas saved the life of Jamestown leader John Smith. Her father, the tribal chief, was about to bash his brains out when, according to Smith, quote, "At the minute of my execution, she hazarded the beating out of her own brains to save mine. And not only that, but so prevailed with her father that I was safely conducted to Jamestown." After receiving instruction in the faith by Minister Alexander Whitaker, she became Jamestown's first Native American convert to Christianity. At her baptism, she took on the biblical name Rebecca. Later, she married colonist John Rolfe. Rolfe had asked for special permission to do so, as this was the first official marriage between an Englishman and a Native American. Eventually, they traveled together to England. There, she caused quite a stir and was even entertained by royalty. She died on the way home. English settler gear. This is so last season. The tower behind me is the only 17th century structure still standing here at Jamestown. It was part of the church that was built to replace the one burned in Bacon's Rebellion. Now, the memorial church building behind the tower, built in 1907, encompasses the ruins of churches dating all the way back to 1617, marking the location of the meeting place of the very first representative assembly in the summer of 1619. This General Assembly met in response to orders from the Virginia Company to establish one equal and uniform government over all Virginia, which would provide, quote, just laws for the happy guiding and governing of the people there inhabiting. It was also in this year, 1619, 1 year before the Pilgrims landed north of here at Plymouth Rock, that another crucial event occurred. The very first Africans arrived at Jamestown. A Dutch slave trader exchanged a cargo of some 20 Africans that he had captured in a battle over food and provisions with a Spanish ship. These Africans may have become indentured servants, similar in legal position to poor Englishmen who traded several years' labor in exchange for passage to America. A race-based slave system wouldn't fully develop for another 60 years. People have long recognized the importance of raising up monuments to the glory of God and His many providential blessings, such as the 103-foot-tall Jamestown Tercentenary Monument. Its inscription reads, "Lastly and chiefly, the way to prosper and achieve good success is to make yourselves all of one mind for the good of your country and your own, and to serve and fear God, the giver of all goodness. For every plantation which our Heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted out." Advice of London Council for Virginia to the Colony, 1606. Even though things were relatively prosperous, crossing the Atlantic to settle in Virginia at this time was risky. Of the 14,000 settlers from 1607 to 1622, most either died or returned to England. This historical adventure is leading us on a road trip to Woodstock, Virginia, where we'll discuss Peter Muhlenberg, like we promised you in the Pennsylvania episodes of Drive Through History. I gotta tell you, driving through rural Virginia, it's really fun looking at these fall colors. Well, I finally made it to Woodstock, Virginia, where Peter Muhlenberg moved to become the pastor of a German-speaking Lutheran church and an English-speaking Anglican church. It was also here that he became a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. Peter Muhlenberg was born on October 1st, 1746, in Trapp, Pennsylvania. He was the son of Henry Muhlenberg, founder of the American Lutheran Church. Like his father, Peter became an ordained Lutheran minister. Later, he was ordained as a priest in the Anglican Church. Henry and Anna Muhlenberg had 11 children together and raised an extraordinary family, and Peter was no exception. Unlike his father, who chose to stay neutral in the war, Peter chose to fight. Legend has it that Peter Muhlenberg had a flair for the dramatic. And on the morning of January 21st, 1776, the Reverend walked into church and conducted services just like it was any other Sunday. He decided to end his sermon with a passage from the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, which begins, "To everything there is a season, a time for war, a time for peace." He then paused and said, "Now is a time for war." He removed his robes, and everyone could see the uniform he was wearing underneath. Now, the church that this took place in used to sit right in the middle of what is now an intersection, right here in the heart of Woodstock, Virginia. Reverend Muhlenberg then spent the next day enlisting volunteers, and by the end of the day, 300 men were in his company. George Washington then ordered him south, where he helped protect Georgia and South Carolina from British invasion. But he didn't stay in South Carolina for long. He was soon ordered north, where he distinguished himself in the battles of Brandywine and Monmouth. He eventually found his way back here to Virginia, where he fought in the Battle of Yorktown, defeating the British under the leadership of General Washington. He was then brevetted a major general for his services. After the war, Peter Muhlenberg was elected to the first Congress from the state of Pennsylvania, and later served briefly as U.S. Senator. Peter Muhlenberg was an extraordinary American. He was a citizen, soldier, Christian minister, politician, and family man. He is honored with a statue in the U.S. Capitol. He died on his birthday, October 1st, 1807, at the age of 61.
We're here in Colonial Williamsburg. Our goal was to make it here by the peak of the fall. I think we nailed it. Isn't it pretty?
Nailed it!
Thanks, evolution.
If you ever find yourself in this part of the country, you simply must visit Colonial Williamsburg. There's just nothing else like it anywhere in America. Colonial Williamsburg resides next to the College of William and Mary, which was founded in 1693. Williamsburg became the capital of Virginia after colonists decided the location was more suitable than mosquito-ridden Jamestown. Modern-day Williamsburg is both a restoration and a recreation. Of the 500 or so 18th century buildings, 88 are original to the Revolutionary era, and the remainder is composed of faithful reproductions. You can take your 21st century kids here and have an immersion experience in 18th century life. Here you can get reacquainted with the joys of living before the Industrial Revolution. Take oxen, for instance. I mean, who wouldn't want to spend the whole day dragging a plow around behind these two handsome fellows?
One of the things I love about Colonial Williamsburg is the fact that, oh, great. Cut. Buy a new pair of shoes.
But hey, as you know by now, I love colonial architecture, and there's just no better place to see so many amazing examples from the era. You will also see authentic reenactors, sample the local cuisine, and ride in an authentic horse-drawn carriage.
You know, I love coming to Colonial Williamsburg. It's like they transport you back in time.
You can avoid the hustle and bustle of our shallow culture. Excuse me. Hey, yeah, uh-huh. Oh, Brangelina having trouble again? They're on the cover? Why don't you pick one up for me, okay, and meet me for a macchiato? Okay, good times.
Dave, the flag's not blowing. Could you do something for me about that?
After my visit to Williamsburg, I drove the Colonial Parkway to Yorktown. I couldn't have been here at a more beautiful time, could I? The Colonial Parkway is one of the most special places to drive in the country. It was designed to be carefully shielded from commercial development, and no trucks are allowed. Despite the fact that you may be barreling down the road in the family truckster, this parkway is designed to help you with your simulated time travel experience as you travel between the Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown Triangle. Well, this is where it all ended, Yorktown, Virginia. And this is the famous battlefield. After 6 years at war, a war where the American patriots lost more battles than they won, it came down to one decisive battle that would change world history and allow for an independent United States of America. After 2 years of battle in the South and a defeat at the Battle of Cowpens in South Carolina, the British troops retreated here at Yorktown, near Williamsburg, for a little R&R. They would wait here with about 7,000 men on the banks of the York River. It was a simple plan, really.
The British Army would chill out a while and relax in some gorgeous fall weather, not unlike today. Then the British Navy would arrive to pick them up and they'd go to New York to fight another day. But there was only one problem, however. George Washington had a plan of his own, and that was to finally finish things once and for all.
After seeing the Americans put up such a scrappy fight at the Battle of Germantown, the French made a commitment to join the Americans in the fight against the British. A navy of nearly 30 heavy warships had sailed from the Caribbean to Chesapeake Bay, the place where the mouths of both the York River and the James River meet and surround this peninsula of land. The French forces were led by General Comte de Rochambeau, the American forces led, of course, by General George Washington, and the British Army was commanded by General Lord Cornwallis. The siege and battle that followed involved three great military giants, each of whom were about to make some serious history. As the French Navy was moving in from the south, George Washington raced down from the north to meet them. The troops under his command would soon grow to 17,000 men. This included 3,000 French troops and a number of Canadian defectors from the 2nd Regiment. The Americans and their allies outnumbered the British by over 2 to 1.
Now, it might seem strange that General Cornwallis would choose to rest his army on a peninsula that offered little means of escape, but he had complete confidence in the capable British Navy to arrive as instructed and rescue him. After all, the Americans had a pretty small navy that posed no real threat to the British Navy.
But the British arrived a little late and found the French fleet anchored in Chesapeake Bay and guarding the entrances of both the James River and the York River. The French Navy outnumbered and outgunned the British Navy, and an all-day battle ensued, which drove the British Navy out of the area.
It was at this point that the American and French artillery really came into play. The idea was fairly simple. Pound the British positions with artillery. Advance, pound some more, repeat. According to Brigadier General Henry Knox, the American artillery commander, the Americans and French fired some 15,000 artillery rounds at the British during the 9-day bombardment. The final storming of some of the British line, called redoubts, then ended with bloody bayonet battles. While his troops were being pounded by artillery in trenches and dirt holes, General Cornwallis was carefully coordinating his plans from the relative luxury of a home here in Yorktown, a home that many believe to be the house standing behind me. This is the house of Thomas Nelson Jr., a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the man who succeeded Thomas Jefferson as governor of Virginia. Nelson truly believed that Cornwallis was holed up inside of his home. And as commander of the Lower Virginia militia, Nelson valued the cause more than he valued his home. And so he gave the orders to open fire. Oh yeah, that's a cannonball. Probably not original, but pretty cool that it's stuck in the side of the house.
Thomas Nelson was highly admired by his men for both his integrity and his bravery. At his funeral just a few years after the war, he was given a tremendous eulogy that ended as follows. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, "This was a man."
It soon became obvious to General Cornwallis that he was having a very bad day indeed. Defeat was inevitable, and for a number of reasons, even surrendering proved to have its difficulties. The British raised the white flag here at Yorktown on October 19th, 1781. Cornwallis's deputy, General O'Hara, first attempted to surrender to the French General Rochambeau, But Rochambeau's aide-de-camp, a man by the name of Matthew Dumas, is reputed to have said, and pardon my French, "Vous vous trompez, le général en chef de notre armée est à la droite," which is French for, "You are mistaken, the commander-in-chief of our army is to the right." He then proceeded to take him over to Washington so that he could surrender to the right guy. That event happened at this very field I'm standing in. O'Hara then attempted to surrender to Washington. But Washington didn't want a subordinate of Cornwallis to surrender. After all, this was the moment he had spent 8 years fighting to achieve, and he wanted to see Cornwallis himself. But Washington had been told that Cornwallis wasn't feeling well. I'll bet he wasn't. So, in order to end hostilities and not create an issue over military protocol, Washington said in so many words, "I'll have my people call your people," which essentially means they'll let the subordinates hammer out the details together.
News of the great defeat reached not so jolly old England about a month later. Upon hearing the news, the British Prime Minister Frederick Lord North is reputed to have said, "Oh God, it's all over." And as it turned out, it was.
There were some minor skirmishes until the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. But with great cost, in both blood and treasure, independence had been secured for the United States of America. Hey, it's cool. I don't want any trouble. Now it's like freezing my forehead.
Always wear your seatbelt.